Hi, this is Peter Teuscher. I'm here with Tobi Dempker. Thanks for joining us for another podcast where we pick a topic and see where the conversation takes us. We talk about things like personal development, culture, leadership, and a bit of philosophy, and everything in between. So I hope you enjoy our conversation today. How are you doing today, Tobi?
I'm good, thanks. It's getting in, we're kind of in semi-vacation holiday mode here, midsummer. But yeah, no, things are good. I'm semi-working, so I don't know really where I am, but somewhere in between.
Okay, great. I think to all of our listeners, I just wanted to put it out there that we do have a YouTube channel for anyone watching it there. And if you subscribe, it just helps us reach more people. We don't do this for financial gain. This is talking about things that we believe in and hoping to add some value to people's lives. So the more people that subscribe, the more people we reach. So yeah, we appreciate that. And because the podcasts are doing well, people are listening and downloading. YouTube, not so much. So, but anyway, so yeah, please like and subscribe. That'll get us out to more people. And but those listening, thanks for tuning in. So, do we want to jump right in?
I guess we do, yeah. You chose a topic for us today, didn't you?
Yeah.
Mhm.
So this is often Toby does a lot of the the team development leadership stuff. And I focus a lot on the coaching topics, even though we in our work we cover both areas, but both have our specialties, and so one that is really helpful in the whole coaching process is looking at habits. And so I'd really like to dive in today about the importance of habits and how habits affect our lives and why they are so important for us. So any first thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, when it comes to, you started talking about personal development, and when we're talking about personal development and personal change, I mean, these are things that we have been sort of covering before in some aspect, but obviously creating habits and creating or changing habits, it's something that is really central in both personal development and in coaching. So it's a really interesting topic. And when it comes to, I mean, I focus a lot on leadership development, obviously creating, successful or effective habits around yourself. That's yeah, it's crucial for that part as well. So yeah, intrigued to see where this takes us.
Absolutely, and I think it's fundamental to anybody who wants to achieve any goals, anybody who wants to make change in their life. It's all about changing your behaviors. So if you have a goal that you want to achieve, the first question to be asking yourself is, what behaviors do I need? What kind of behaviors do I need in order to achieve that goal? And if we're wanting to change something in our life, the change starts within. So it's about changing our own habits, and that leads to and by habits, I really like to focus on two areas, and that's habit of thought and habit of action. So behaviors and thinking. So
Mm,
because I think the things that we do, for the most part, the things we do most reliably in life are the things we do unconsciously. And once something becomes a habit, we no longer think about it, and it just happens automatically. And so that's
mm,
why I think habits are so fundamental in success and in finding more happiness in life. The habits that we have that are self-defeating, we don't realize we're doing them, or we don't realize why we do them. They happen unconsciously, and we get frustrated after the fact. I think those habits which stand in our own way of our own success and our happiness are really those things that we have in our ability to change. And a lot of times we think of our habits as part of our identity, and we look at it in terms of, well, that's just the way I am. But
mm.
if that's not getting you what you want out of life, or if that's not making you happy, then there's no reason you have to live with that. I mean, we are adaptable. We have the ability to change. So I think
Yeah, sure.
recognizing those habits is kind of the first thing in this whole process.
Yeah. I mean, that's interesting as well when we talk about, if we talk about change, that it's a common, I think, perception to say that, yeah, it's so difficult to change and it's so difficult with change. Yet it's kind of proven that human beings are perhaps the most adaptable species on the planet. I mean, and we're incredibly adaptable to change and external changes and things around us. But still, when it comes to changing habits and changing our ways on a personal level, we feel that it's extremely difficult. And as I think you said that when we're talking about habits, it's something that we're doing unconsciously and we're not aware of it. So bringing attention to the habits that we have, I mean, to just be able to analyze the current state, that's so crucial. You know, what am I doing right now? What am I doing now to help my situation, or what is hindering my situation, and where do I want to go? And there's so much in these habits that we don't probably think about it so much, but we're still doing it on a day-to-day basis. So bringing some awareness to those habits, it's interesting, and it's really interesting to see how I actually do things, getting some feedback on it perhaps, and then thinking, what's helping me in depending on where I want to go.
Yeah, one of my mantras, the thing that I tend to repeat fairly often. It was on my website. It was my sort of headline for a while. But awareness allows change, because until you become aware of something, it remains below the surface and it remains difficult to change. And so, that's why coaching is such a helpful process. It helps you uncover the things that either you're unaware of or you don't want to be looking at, that you're avoiding. So for the first thing is to kind of recognize the habits that are helpful to you, that you want to, do more of this and do less of this. So the things that you want to do less of, recognizing those and then knowing that you can change, because I think there's two reasons people are resistant to change. On a biological level, changing our habits, it takes energy, it takes mental energy, it takes us out of homeostasis, kind of balance that we've found in our lives. And then I think from a mental perspective, we get into our comfort zone, and then it becomes, difficult to step out of that. We create an identity around our behaviors and habits, and for better or worse, that's who we are, and that's not necessarily the case. And you look at someone like Dr. Joe Dispenza, who says, by the time you're 35, 95% of your behavior is habit. And so if you think about it, for those people who value freedom, if you are unaware of the habits you've created for yourself or that you've become accustomed to, and you start to recognize that you get to a certain age and everything you're doing is kind of automated, then there's not a whole lot of free will there, right? So I think there's a huge benefit, obviously, in having these habits and having all these processes happen unconsciously, so that we don't have to spend so much of our cognition trying to figure out what we're doing. I often like to use the example of for those people, I think most people drive. If you when you learned how to drive a car, there were a lot of things that you had to be aware of. When to check your mirrors and just all these different things. And so imagine if every time you got in your car you were like a beginner again and you had to think about all those things. And now you see people driving, I don't recommend it, but you see people driving with their cell phones. You see people doing all kinds of things which they shouldn't be doing when they're driving. But the only reason that they're able to do that is because everything else about driving a car happens autonomously. It happens without even thinking, and there is a lot to it. That's why you have to go to driving school. You have to get a license. You have to prove that you have all those skills, and yet at a certain point, all those functions tend to become automated. So I think there's a ton of benefit, obviously, in automating a lot of our behaviors. The thing is, if we automate the things that aren't in our benefit, and we do that a lot, that's when it becomes very detrimental for us.
Yeah, I mean on that, I've been using a model a lot where we talk about it's based on I think it's Dreyfus, but we talk about when you if you translate it, we're talking about being unconsciously unskilled up to a level of becoming unconsciously skilled, and there's many steps in between, but it's interesting that part when you become aware of something and you really work on it, that's a great kind of learning zone. But then if you become really good at it, yeah, it becomes a habit, and then you never think about it again. So you kind of lose that awareness, and that could, yeah, perhaps be a little bit of a trap for you as well if you're becoming too well, habits can be a trap, I guess. And linking back to something we talked about before when we talked about change, we talked about immunity to change, the work by no, what's his name? Robert Keegan.
Yeah.
Kevin Keegan is a football coach. But and he and Lisa, what's her name? Anyway, immunity to change when they talk about how you create certain habits and yeah, I guess habits to protect you from something, and to change those, you have to change your assumptions about things and your awareness around things to be able to find out what are the false assumptions and the big false assumptions that are driving the habits or the behaviors that you have right now. So you can't really it's very difficult to be successful in changing these behaviors if you don't have an awareness about your assumptions of what is driving these behaviors. So there's a lot of work behind there to be able to change it, right?
Absolutely. It's I think there's a number of different approaches when it comes to habit change, but I think what you're pointing to the mental change, the thinking habits. I think, and I have a few approaches for that, and then there's also the physical habits where I like to, and I'd like to dive a little into BJ Fogg's behavioral model, but I think in you're right. There are strategies that we develop, and often from a young age. We'll have a strategy for dealing with a certain situation, or particularly we'll have a strategy for dealing with how we're feeling, right? Our emotional response to something, and so we tend to avoid that sense of discomfort. It's a big reason why people procrastinate or put things off. They're trying to avoid that sense of discomfort that maybe some outside pressure is putting on them. But at a young age, we're dealing with different emotional situations, and we find strategies to navigate those, and they're based on our perception of the world, not necessarily the reality. And so and I'll see this in, you'll have a manager who just loses it and has a temper tantrum, right? And I can just see that manager as a kid in the grocery store, lying on the floor, pounding on the floor because he's not getting what he wants. That's a strategy that he maybe had as a kid that he's adapted into his adult life, and maybe doesn't even realize it. That's kind of an extreme example, but we have lots of these different strategies that we use to navigate the world, and they become habits. Habits in terms of responding to our emotional needs, habits in thinking, and habits in behavior. To sort of focus for a moment on the thinking habits, people have a lot of self-defeating habits. We have this, some more than others, but I find most people have a fairly well-developed inner critic, especially highly intelligent, successful people. They're the ones who are most, we've talked about this before, they're the most prone to sort of this imposter syndrome and so on. And so when you identify a thinking habit, something that comes up repeatedly that stands in your way, that undermines your confidence, undermines your ability to take action or to find happiness and success that you want, whether it's in relationships or in work or whatever area of your life. I see this I see this in sports. In
Mm.
sports, we have the physical habits, obviously, and we can talk to this to the sports part of habits in a moment. But when you look at very high level of sports, the thing that makes the successful athlete is the mental piece.
Mm.
The mental habits they have, how much the pressure gets to them, what kind of processes that they have mentally, because
Mm.
let's face it, in order to be a pro athlete, you have to be, physically in great shape.
Mm.
In the top percentile of human beings. You also need to have spent many hours practicing and developing skills. And
Mm.
so at that point, it's the mental game that really makes all of the difference. The kids that I coached, I used to, back when Michael Jordan, I mean, people still bring him up as, the greatest basketball player of all time.
Yeah.
Obviously, there are other stars now, but back then I used to say, what was the difference between Michael Jordan and the last guy on the bench, right? They
Mm.
all to play in the professional basketball, the NBA in the U.S. You have to be incredibly talented and physically fit,
Mm.
and yet you have this huge gap between sort of this top player and the person who's not getting any playing time, the last guy on the
Yeah.
bench, and the difference is all mental. Like Michael
Mm.
Jordan believed every shot he took that he would get it, and he just had he'd built such mental resilience and determination, and that's the difference. So he had
Mm.
really good mental habits for what he was doing. Can't speak to the rest of his life, but certainly for basketball. And I
Mm.
think we can all develop those kind of mental habits if we work on them. And
Mm.
so one of the tools that I use is, and people kind of roll their eyes at affirmations because, they think of this looking in the mirror, telling yourself that, I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and people like me. And I think what I like to do is I like to focus on, okay, I'll tell a coaching client, okay, tell me what are some typical thoughts that you'll have and that are negative, that are standing in your way, and then we'll find one statement that opposes those thoughts.
Yeah. Mm.
So it needs to be something that you say that as if it's already happened. It needs to be in the positive. So it can't be, well, I don't do this anymore or something like that. It has to be in the positive, and it has to be something that you actually believe in. So if it's too much, like if you're making a statement like I know I can be the best in my field, or I know I'm the best in my field for example, if that's not believable, then taking it a step back and saying, I know I could be the best in my field, or I know I could be really good at this. So you take this statement, and then every time you have those negative thinking habits, you start to repeat that over and over. And
Mm.
it's like my coaching clients, I say, your thoughts are like the way your thinking process works, the neurons firing together, wiring together. It's kind of like you're taking a walk through the forest, right? And if you continue on that path will always kind of stay there. If you walk a
Mm.
new path, it takes some time to walk it in and create a path, but the other one, if you no longer take it, will grow over. And
Mm.
so that's kind of the metaphor that I use. And so if you start to walk this new path with this kind of mantra, this affirmation that you tell yourself, those other habits will stop firing, will stop wiring, and you'll end up having less and less of those thoughts, and
Mm.
and that will stop undermining your thought process. So for me,
Yeah.
that's a very powerful way to change thinking habits.
Yeah. Yeah, that's super interesting. And it seems like, I mean, here obviously experience comes into play as well, right? If you've been in a situation many times and you've overcome a certain challenge, you know you can do it, right? So you can sort of, or if you're using your metaphor, the path is walked on before, so it's a wider path that you can perhaps enjoy a bit more. But when you get into new territory, man, it's really difficult. And then continuing with talking about sports, I mean, if you look at tennis is amazingly like that, and especially at this time when you have the three greatest players in the history of tennis on the male side, being completely, they're so much better than everybody else. And they're more experienced. And I mean, I'm talking about Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic. and their mental game is just amazing. If you look at the younger players, I mean, skill-wise, as you're saying, it's not a big difference. But they've been there before. They believe in their ability. Yeah, and just looking at their mental game is it's fantastically interesting, actually.
Have you ever
And I
read?
know
Uh,
if also if you there was a Swedish golfer named Annika Sörenstam, and she was really successful in the, I don't know, late 90s, beginning of the 2000s, perhaps.
hmm.
But she was in the beginning, she was really struggling as well, and she had confidence issues, and she was afraid of she had thought patterns saying like, oh, if I win, I'm in the lead, maybe I have to give an acceptance speech or a reward speech, and that really impacted her game. So she started to sort of close down and play bad on when she was in the lead. But she had a professional coach working on her with her on that, and I think they wrote something on the bottom of her cap or something saying, I forgot what it was, but it was something like, you can do this or whatever. And it was a sort of humoristic reminder that really supported her. And then, yeah, she became successful.
Yeah, and that's pointing to those strategies we develop. So there'll be all kinds of fears that we have, and that's where we get into that self-sabotaging, self-defeating behavior. When we have what's the one question that I ask myself when a client is telling me about some self-defeating behavior, that I look for what's the hidden benefit, right?
Mm.
So, but I think that's getting I mean, that points to a very important piece of the mental habits that we develop. But that's another huge topic. So I don't want to get
Yeah.
too far off the track of our habits conversation today. But when you were bringing up tennis, I wanted to ask you: have you read any of the Inner Game books?
Yeah. What's in
Yeah.
Timothy
Galway, yeah,
Galway? Yeah.
yeah.
No,
So
they're great. Yeah.
yeah, so and that was way back in my early days of my own personal development and my first interest in coaching, and his first book was The Inner Game of Tennis, obviously,
Yeah.
and so that's all about the whole mental side. And then he did the Inner Game of Work, the Inner Game of Golf. He did a
Yeah.
few of them, but they're amazing in terms of understanding how important the mental side is and the mental habits that you develop and how you then train yourself to see the world and respond to the world. So I
Mm.
think that's why the tennis example was a great one.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's so. I think golf and tennis, not only, but it's in any elite sport. I mean, the competition is so extremely fierce now. So working on your mental game is a must for any professional athlete nowadays. And yeah, it's interesting to see how beneficial it can be.
Yeah, that's why a lot of teams or even individual athletes have a mental trainer as well, or
Yeah.
mental coach.
Mm.
So and I think there's a ton of value in that, because that's probably the biggest obstacle. You can spend all the time you want in the gym or on the playing field or whatever, practicing. But if you don't have the mental side of it down, it'll get in the way. So, and the same is true of life. Obviously, if you have mental habits that are standing in your way, whether it's in your private life or in your work life, you're always going to limit your potential and your
Yeah.
opportunities.
Yeah. I mean, for our conversation here today, I think I mean, the sports metaphor, it's inspiring, but it's also helpful. But the real key for, our us common people, if you want to say, is like, yeah, how can you utilize these strategies and tactics and maybe tricks to support ourselves in our day-to-day work? And it can be with family and relationships or in work or whatever, right? I mean, the professional scene is extremely volatile and difficult and challenging and competitive. So how do you orient yourself in this environment? I mean, there's, yeah, a lot of people are looking for support and looking for habits that can be supporting them in where they want to go. So I mean, coaching really comes in there, and I think that's one of the main reasons why coaching has been kind of exploding in the last few decades, right?
Actually, the whole period of this whole COVID time where people have had more time at home, time to reflect. I mean, I've had more inquiries and more referrals and more discussions around coaching, like people coming to me and requesting coaching from me. It has really increased in the last little while. Which is great because as this, you and I both not being able to travel, so you're not doing as many workshops and so on, left room to do more private one-on-one. You've focused on teaching. I've done a lot more one-on-one coaching, and so, which is great because I really love helping individuals. So obviously it's great to help people in leadership positions, to help organizations improve, but people to help improve their own personal lives is also something I find super rewarding. And so I guess back to the question of, well, where do you begin? And the starting point is always, as I said, awareness allows change. So becoming aware of the habits, whether they're mental or physical. And I think when it comes, another point about the mental habits, it relates to the whole process of meditation. And in meditation, one of the things you try to do is you get to that state where you're becoming the observer of your thoughts. You're not captured by your thoughts. And if you can, obviously meditation is a habit that I encourage. I practice regularly, but I also think if you understand that whole process of getting into the observer role and becoming the observer of your thoughts and actions, that's really helpful in seeing where things are going wrong in terms of your happiness and your success. When you go, why do I always, after the fact, why do I always do that, or why do I always have these thoughts, or why does this keep me up at night? And so when you can kind of separate yourself from your thoughts, you can start to recognize that. Obviously, that's why coaches, or if you're dealing with emotional trauma and some mental health issues, therapist, counselor, any kind of a mental health practitioner can be helpful. But it's so hard until you kind of get a regular meditation process, and even then it's no guarantee you're going to figure out all your little idiosyncrasies. But that's why it's good to have a neutral person who's going to be able to help you dig into where where the challenges lie. So I think from the mental habit side, that one tool that in terms of having a mantra or an affirmation, but even before that, becoming an observer of your thoughts is a really important step. So you can start to see that the connections between your negative thinking and how that inhibits or how that triggers certain behaviors, or how that inhibits your own potential.
Yeah. I mean, if I speak from just a personal experience level, for me, meditation, it's really a tool to be able to sort of rewind when I'm feeling when I have those thoughts and feelings of, well, it can be discomfort or stress or whatever, but something that is keeping me back and I can't really figure it out by myself. And I wouldn't say that in my experience, meditation doesn't really fix my problems, but it helps me to rewind and then perhaps look at it with new eyes and refresh myself. But sometimes I can't. Sometimes, as you're saying, my mind steps in and I can't detach myself from those thoughts. But when it works, it's fantastic. It's great. Yeah.
Well, I didn't say it was easy, and it takes a lot of practice. And if you think about the way your thoughts work, right? You have a certain thought, it attracts more of those thoughts and more, and they accumulate, and all of a sudden you're in this spiral of, if it's a negative thing, or if you're thinking about a happy memory, you'll all of a sudden you can attract more of those. But so often our thoughts are negative, and we accumulate worrisome thoughts. We get into these negative spirals, and that's where it becomes detrimental. Or these self-doubt, where we focus on all the things where things went wrong. And it's so funny with our negativity bias. I remember one client specifically, and she she made this point of, this always happens to me, and then we looked back and it had happened to her twice, and yet that's always happens to me, right? And so this is where this process of sort of asking, is this true? Eckhart Tolle talks about, is that so? Asking yourself that question. I think Katie Byron also talks about asking that question. That's part of her process. Is that true, right? So I think that's a really good one to actually. The thoughts that you have, aren't necessarily true. They're possibilities, and the more credence you give them, the more emphasis, then the more it can take you in a certain direction. So I think what meditation does for you, I usually explain it in terms of, it's like hitting the reset button, because you take yourself out of that spiral, or out of that attracting new thoughts to you. Our brain works as a network. That's why I talk to people about, don't make lists. Like, I love mind maps. If you want to be creative, you want to brainstorm, your mind doesn't work in lists. It networks thoughts and ideas, right? So, and not always to our benefit. So that's where doing meditation will get you out of that sort of reaching for new thoughts and trying to attract new thoughts, and it slows down, because in meditation you go from, your beta brainwave frequency, where you're very busy thinking about a lot of things, and it can take you down into the alpha and even into the theta state, where the amount of thoughts you have per minute significantly slow down, and that helps you relax. But it also helps you kind of hit that reset and not get lost in that whole, barrage of thoughts that sometimes overwhelm us.
Yeah, well, very often overwhelm us, I think. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And interesting. I was intrigued by that, what you said about what, I'm always in this situation, or you can find, in coaching, there's a lot of sort of semantics, or the language is really important, right? And you can just by sort of keywords that keep repeating all of a sudden, just to dig into that, what does that actually mean? I had one experience of, people tend to say I don't know, or a lot. And I had this one situation where there was a coachee, and she was saying I don't know all the time, just repeating that. And after a while that really sticks out. So I asked, well, what do you know? And it those kind of questions just flips it over, and then you start looking at, okay, what does that actually mean? What do I know? And looking at those positive sides as well. And it was kind of a changer for that conversation, actually. It's really interesting.
Yeah. That's the part of NLP that I really like. So neuro-linguistic programming, for anyone who doesn't know, neuro, obviously the mental piece, your thinking part. Linguistic is, the language we use, and then programming are the kind of habits, right? The patterns of behavior. And so when I have done exercise with people, when we're just starting our coaching sessions, where I'll ask them to write a few paragraphs, or write a little, summary of who they are and how they see the world, or anything they want to talk about. And then I really focus in on the language that they use, and that can, the typical words we repeat again and again do reflect things about the things we believe about ourselves. And I think it's really helpful. And just because we do it habitually, we don't even notice it. And I know from now, having done a number of these podcasts, if I listen back to them, which is painful, I think a lot of people don't like the sound of their own voice, and I'm one of those. And so I find that when I listen to myself, I'm one of those people, and I try to consciously stop it, but I'm one of those people who says, And so yeah, but I think that's why just reflecting, okay, you don't always need to. I think if you listen to yourself recordings a lot, I think you can become very self-critical. But it does. You're right about that. There are a lot of hidden meanings behind the language that we use, what that represents for us. And when I try and help people develop a philosophy, that's a big part of the work I like to do with leaders and with individuals who, like, on a private level. is helping them develop a conscious philosophy for life, because the philosophy then drives their behaviors and actions. And one of those things is let's look at how you're defining the words that you're using in that philosophy. So I think that's really important too. So, but we can go off on a lot of tangents here.
I was just thinking of a few things there as well. I mean, if I just connect to what you just said about listening to yourself, and I mean, if we use that metaphor, okay, if I want to be a better presenter or something, I mean, obviously, some things that you want to do is to record yourself or view yourself and listen to it, and then create an awareness of what you're saying or what you're not saying and how you can improve, and then you practice, right? And then, I mean, you can apply that methodology into any kind of behavioral change or habit change that you want to do with, if you have that mirror. So coaching really, really, really helps there. But the other part is also thinking about purpose. And I think the first podcast we ever had was about purpose, right? So, that's, for me, that's, if not the first, the second most important thing is, okay, so why do you want to change? What do you want to change? What would that lead to? What the habits that you're having right now, what kind of purpose are they serving? And is that the right purpose? Is not? Well, what do you want to achieve? And then looking at what kind of habits or thought processes or patterns will serve you to reach in that direction. So, I mean, tying that purpose into what we're doing right now, we kind of have to bring it in there to be successful in your habitual change. Right?
Yeah, that point you made about the example of recording yourself and in order to improve, or I know in sports we also use video so people can see the actions, because they can't see themselves when they're performing the action. I think that if you can give yourself balanced feedbacks, positive as well as negative, then that's helpful. Otherwise, when you're doing that, I really recommend you get a neutral person to help you with that. Otherwise, I know for myself, for example, I write a lot. I'm part of a great support group of English-speaking writers here in Hamburg. Amazing group of people that I get to interact with, and so that's really helpful, because I can sit and read my own work and just go, oh, this is just terrible, and then but if I share it with other people, then it gets a more balanced feedback to it. And your point about purpose is also important, because this is what I want to get to when I talk about the BJ Fogg's behavior model. Is motivation is also a big piece, and we've talked about motivation in the past. The three pillars, where it's purpose, autonomy, and mastery, and I think purpose. More and more people are looking for a purpose-driven life, or having some element of purpose. So I think you're right. Asking yourself why you want to do something is a huge piece of your motivation. And I look at it with some people that I work on a personal level. I look at three phases, because people will come to me and they'll say, how do I get what I want? I want to have this goal. Can you coach me there? And then there are other people who are looking for clarity, who, they're going, well, what do I want? I'm not really sure what I want. And then the thing that people don't ask enough is, who am I, right? So because our identity is made up of a lot of things. From we identify with our behaviors, with certain labels we give ourselves, and so on. But when you get really clear from a systemic perspective on all the different elements of what makes you, what your purpose is, what your values are, then you can have a much clearer idea of why you're doing things. So then when you say what you want, you can go, well, what part of that wants that, or what's driving me towards that, and really recognizing, am I going after this for the reasons that are authentic to me, that support my values, and so on. And then once you take those first two steps, then getting what you want is the easiest part. I can coach anyone through that. so I think in terms of our habits, it's making sure our habits are also aligned with a lot of those values and who we want to be, not who we've been conditioned to be, because a lot of our habits are based on conditioning, right? So we develop these habits. They're not congruent with our own value systems, our own idea of who we want to be, and then we have trouble overcoming because we've been told we are lazy, we've been told what we can't do, and that relates to both our behavioral habits and our mental habits.
Yeah.
All that conditioning we've had from our past.
Yeah, and I think a part of it is also that we look at role models that are not supporting. They're not real, quote quote, kind of role models. I mean, looking at, I don't know, Kardashians or whatever they call it. No, but I mean, for me, what I want to get to is, defining what success looks like for you. Uh, I think for me, that's really key. I'm just really trying to understand, what does success look like? Who am I? What do I want to achieve? What's important for me? And then being really firm on that. I think it's really easy for myself or for anybody to get pulled off track. Oh, that looks good, or that sounds interesting, or that might be great. But is it really what I want? And then if you can create clarity around that, it's like values. They can support you in making really clear decisions. Now, this is what I want to go for. This is the habit that I want to have. This is what's important for me. So for me to be able to define success for yourself, that's also really, I mean, it ties into purpose, obviously. But then, what is that goal that you want to work for? What's important for you? How much do you want to work on something? Maybe that's also a big part of it. I don't want to work so much on something. I want to
Yeah,
do other things. Yeah.
exactly. What are you willing to do to achieve something? And
Mm.
and so that's why the whole process of when you've set a goal for yourself, or I have these two buckets. I have dreams and I have goals, and some things remain sort of in the dream bucket, and when I'm ready to actually do something about it, I put it in the goal bucket, right? So,
Mm.
and then the next step after deciding what your goal is to recognize the behaviors that you need in order to achieve it, right?
Mm.
So the first step is really to identify, okay, if I'm going to achieve this, if I want to write a book, I have to develop a habit of writing every day for at least an hour, right? For example, is
Yeah.
one example. And so anything that you want to do, whether it's physical goals, you do a lot of sports. If you want to run a marathon, you have to develop certain habits of behavior, of training, of practice in order to get there. So it's about really developing those habits, and then as part of that whole mental process, physical process of training. And I guess, sorry, to jump back to the whole sports comparison, I can go out and I can shoot hoops for hours, but if I'm not working on the correct way to release the ball, the correct motion, and so on, I'm not going to get any better. So I think it's about developing the right habits, right?
Yeah.
So if there's something, when I shoot I for some reason I've developed a habit of my elbow going out when I'm trying to release and that throws off my shot. And so consciously working on making sure that hand motion is correct in basketball or with anything you do, making sure that you're practicing the right habits, because we can do things over and over. We can, Malcolm Gladwell talking about your 10,000 hours of practice. But if you're not practicing the right things, you're going to, if you practice the things that are going to lead you to failure, then you're going to fail, obviously.
Yeah.
So that's that part of it. And then, I think developing our behaviors to get to the goals that we want to get to is the thing that's really key. And so the next thing I want to talk to is about BJ Fogg's behavioral model of change.
Okay.
So have you heard of this?
I have, but can you remind me and whoever's listening?
Yeah, absolutely. So BJ Fogg is, I think his first TED Talk was probably 10 years ago. I don't know, but he's a behavioral psychologist, and he has a book called Tiny Habits. So he believes in making small incremental change in order to get where you want to go. So one example that he gives is, he decided to put his model into action. So he looked for triggers that would trigger new behavior. So it's not about just trying to develop a new habit. It's about replacing an old habit often, or finding a way that something will trigger that new habit. So for him, every time he needed to go to the washroom, afterwards he did 2 push-ups, and then it became 4, and then it became 10, and all of a sudden he was doing 100 push-ups a day, right? So he used a trigger that was, he didn't have to think about it, just happened automatically, and then he associated this new behavior with that trigger, right? So that was his example. So he has this, he puts it onto this matrix, onto this graph. So you'll have this axis. You'll have one side, you'll have motivation. The other one will be ability. And so where the 2 lines meet, that's low motivation and high ability. That's where your least chance of actually developing that habit. But if it's really easy to do, you need low ability. It's pretty easy to develop a habit. Or if you have really high motivation. But if you have some degree of ability and some degree of motivation, there's going to be a point where a tipping point where it's going to be easier to develop that new habit. So that's why you start with tiny habits. You start with small incremental things, because you don't need a lot of ability or a lot of motivation, right? So you don't need to be super fit to do 2 push-ups, right?
Exactly.
But over time, and the more you get better at doing those push-ups, the less motivation you'll need, because it's less strenuous, less challenging. And so if you can adopt that model to any part of life, that's how you're going to be able to create these new behaviors, right? So that's I find a really helpful one for people who are wanting to change sort of their behaviors, their actions, the way they respond to things. It's recognizing first what the trigger is that's triggering a negative behavior that you don't want. Or if you're trying to incorporate a new behavior, find something to couple that with, right? So, whether it's something that you do automatically every day. If you already have a habit of brushing your teeth, tie something to do after you brush your teeth, right? So that's that connection. So.
Yeah. Okay. So, I I think it's from the Heath brothers. They wrote a book called Switch, and they're talking about change in a lot of different ways, but they were also very sort of recommending this part of just do something for a very short time, or just start something. If you're going to clean the house, say that, okay, but you're sort of putting it off, but just start by doing it for 5 minutes. Say, I'm going to clean for 5 minutes, and then you'll probably end up doing a lot more than that. But just invest 5 minutes of your time to start doing it, and then maybe you can create the habit of doing it further. I guess it's a little bit, maybe it's not exactly the same thing, but it ties into this, I guess it's a trend now, this run a mile a day thing. You're supposed to run an English mile per day, so it's 1.6 kilometers, and it takes, I don't know, depending on your level of fitness, but say 10 to 20, maybe 30 minutes, depending on. But I mean, anybody can invest that amount of time per day, right? So if you just do it every single day, don't think about if you should be working out today. Just think about when you're going to do it. So you're 10, 15 minutes and just do it. 1.6 kilometers. It's not very long, right?
No.
And it was this British gentleman. He'd been doing it for 50 years or something like that, every single day. It's kind of amazing. But it's creating new habits. And then before I'm that way, if I go and say I'm going to run 2 kilometers, I end up running probably a lot more, because it becomes enjoyable after a while.
Yeah, I mean, think about how difficult it is to think, okay, I'm going to run 10K today. Once you've built up enough confidence and enough resilience and fortitude. I mean, if 10K is easy to do, but for me to go, okay, I'm going to get up tomorrow and run 10K, probably wouldn't be healthy for me because I haven't been running enough. I had a little basketball injury a couple of weeks ago, and because I hadn't been doing enough and tried to jump right back into basketball. So I think that's why. I mean, for physical reasons and for mental reasons, starting with small steps is really important. And then the other piece is often referred to as priming, where you create that, in order to avoid the resistance, you prepare things like you already have your shoes ready to go if you want to go for a run the next morning. You prepare them night before, or it's taking that easiest first step. So if you want to do yoga, just take out your yoga mat and put it out, right? So if you set yourself a goal of I'm going to put out my yoga mat, well then you've already built up some momentum. Or I'm gonna clean up my office, and if it's a disaster, then that's something that's going to maybe cause some resistance, maybe create some procrastination. But if I say I'm just going to sort out this pile of papers, that'll get me into some momentum, and all of a sudden, half hour later, the office is all cleaned up. So these are just some very kind of random examples, but if you can prime yourself by just taking that first little step, then it gets the ball rolling. One of the most difficult things is just getting started for a lot of people.
Yeah, and it's also about this issue. I mean, you talked about that matrix of motivation having a big part of it. Creating these small wins, creating quick wins, seeing that this can work. And in consulting work, that really comes in as well. I utilize a lot this matrix when we do kind of team strategy work of finding the first action point, something that's going to have that is easy to implement but have a big impact. What might that be, and finding that first action and just really start working on that and create some momentum, and then moving on to that. So I guess that can apply in both individual work as organizational work as teamwork. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I think the reason you do the tiny habits is because you build up the success. So if you've been telling yourself, I'm actually kind of lazy, or I don't like doing this kind of stuff, then if you start to build up some momentum, then you can realize, it's actually not that hard, right? So then all of a sudden you don't need as much motivation and you don't need as much ability, because you realize it's not so difficult. So I agree with you. Celebrating those small wins, both on a business level and on an individual level, is important. Just feeling that it's the same reason people do those lists. They check them off because there's that gratification, that sense of
achievement.
That sense of achievement, exactly. So as much as when I talk to people about their time management and stuff, I don't recommend a list, but lists can be a first step, as long as you then put them into a plan or a calendar or some way of organizing them. That's a little better than that. And then when you talk about bringing this conversation into the organizational or the business world, what are habits really when you look at them on an organizational level? And really, that's when you get into the discussion about culture, right? Because culture is really just a habit of behaviors, how people interact with each other and behave with each other, and it all starts with the kind of habits that you cultivate within an organization, right? So habits, they are part of human existence. The way we are successful, the way we are, and certainly what that leads to is the kind of culture that an organization develops.
Yeah. And when we're speaking about these habits, I guess everybody knows about it, but we sort of have to refer to Stephen Covey as well. Talking about seven habits. It doesn't matter how scientific you want to be, but it's a great little book and very inspiring to look at, sort of self-coaching yourself of what's working for me. And I think it's a really wonderful little framework of looking at habits that will support you in your own definition of success, right? I've actually personally I find it very beneficial to look at these.
Well, I mean, that's why his work is kind of timeless. It's been around for such a long time,
Mm,
because they're just fundamentally good ideas, whether it's in the workplace or in your private life, right? And
mm,
I quote regularly quote one of Stephen Covey's, 7 Habits. Weekly, I'm sure. I'm always referring back to it, and it's a good
mm.
reminder for me as well. And there are lots of great little things. Like, are you familiar with Don Miguel Ruiz, the Four Agreements?
No, I don't think so. Mm,
Yeah, that's he's a South American. I can't remember exactly what country he's from, but he has it's a very small book, and it's an easy read. But the
mhm,
Four Agreements, he talks about not taking things personally, not making assumptions, always doing your best. Um, so I mean, these are things that you can adopt in your daily life in order to have a positive mindset, a new paradigm, on the way you see the world. And so if you can learn not to take things personally. So it's four agreements are: always do your best, don't take things personally, don't make assumptions, and oh no, I'm drawing a blank on the fourth one. This happens to me. This happens to me when I'm referring to this. I don't know. I must have a mental block there. But anyway,
Yeah.
yeah, I highly recommend recommend his the Four Agreements, and I haven't actually referred to them for a while now. So it's a good reminder for me to
Mm.
reflect on it. But I kind of knew that if I was going to throw it out there, that I was going to put myself at risk of forgetting one of them, and I'm just drawing a blank. It'll come to me right after we,
Yeah,
we
I
finish
know.
this thing.
Uh,
But anyway, I find the Four Agreements are really, because again, it's simple. And if you can integrate that into the philosophy that you have in life, they're really simple ways of getting more success, getting more mental clarity, feeling calmer, right? If you think about something as simple as, don't take things personally, right? We often interpret things that people say. We have this habit of creating a story behind just a few words that someone has spoken to us, and
mm,
and and that's not helpful. It creates this whole drama in our minds that maybe doesn't even exist, right?
mm.
And the whole thing about making assumptions, this habit of assuming things about other things, and that relates to the last point. So assuming what someone means by something, like
Yeah.
instead of just jumping to conclusions, ask another question. Try to that goes to Stephen Covey's, seek first to understand, then to be understood, right?
Yeah.
And always doing your best it's that's an obvious one. So,
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah, I
the other
see
one.
here. It's be impeccable with your
I
word.
was just about to say that's the one. It just came to me. Be impeccable with your word, and the honesty one. I think it's a value that I have and a lot of people have, but it just I was just about to say it, man.
Sorry.
That's all right. But yeah, so be impeccable with your word. I knew if I talked about it long enough, it would come back to me. So yeah,
Yeah.
Four Agreements. I recommend everybody reads that. It has value for anyone. It's just a small little book. It's such an easy read. So
Cool.
yeah, I think those are the biggest tips I have for habits, habit change, things to reflect on, things to be aware of. What
Yeah.
about you? Any other thoughts?
I mean, it ties into a lot of the things that we have talked about before. So it's just, yeah, I have a lot of different kind of thoughts. But I mean, it's such an interesting topic that relates to, I think, every individual, right? How we're doing things, why we're doing things, the purpose, success, motivation, how we can become better individuals, and in different aspects. So there's a lot to it. I'm sure we're going to come back to this to this topic in some way in future conversations.
Yeah, well, it's all interconnected, right? I mean,
Yeah, it
we're
really
it's all
is. It shows
systemic.
more and more. Yeah,
Yeah,
systemic. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. And I think when people look at their own identity and who they are, a lot of it, I'm a person who does this. If you identify with a lot of your behaviors, then looking at your habits is a really important thing. And I think the more healthy habits, like it's everything from your health, your nutrition, to your the way you interact in relationships, the way you are at your workplace, the way you communicate, they're all predicated upon different habits that you've developed, and a lot of them you're just not aware of. So taking that first step, doing some self-reflection, whether it's with a coach or with yourself, journaling, I think is a great way to reflect. So any of these tools that you can use, whether it's meditation, journaling, using a coach.
I mean, any kind of really mindfulness
Absolutely.
exercise, right? It brings attention to becoming aware and mindful about your habits.
Yeah, exactly. So first step, awareness allows change. Become aware of the habits that are standing in your way, whether it's mental or whether it's action, and then just taking tiny steps, recognizing the things that trigger you, or looking for triggers that can help you integrate new habits, and then away you go. And be patient with yourself, I think, is really important. And making sure you're practicing the right things, making sure the habits that you are integrating are really going to get you where you want to go. And I think that's the process that I recommend. And habit change is something that I've worked on myself a lot and worked with clients on a lot. And I think that's going to make the biggest difference in your life, adopting the right habits.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a constant process, I think, of development. We always want to refine ourselves and our habits, and or refine ourselves and creating awareness and adjusting our habits is part of that.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, thanks. So what I was just going to ask, I mean, as I need to step out fairly soon, what habit are you going to nurture now?
I have a whole slew of them, but I think the most important one now is to get back into a better fitness routine. I find for me, the thing is, if I don't have a goal that I'm working towards, I find it difficult then to maintain a habit. So, because of COVID, there's been no basketball since the fall last year. And then, training just started, and I thought I was doing some yoga and going for a run once in a while, but that it wasn't nearly enough to help to get me ready for playing at a reasonably competitive level. And so as a result, second training, I had a slight tear in my upper calf, and now I've got to sit out and so for me, it's about getting back into a habit of daily strengthening and exercise, and not taking it for granted. So that's the biggest habit. And just to get back to your point on about constantly changing, I think it's important to be patient and to recognize that you're never done. You're never finished product. So there's always something that you can improve. And that doesn't need to be daunting, or it doesn't need to be, oh God, if I can never finish, do I want to start? I think it's just the more you do these things, the better you'll feel, and the more motivated you'll be to make more changes. So,
yeah, and to find enjoyment in that process. I mean, I very often think of my mom when she retired. She became so busy with, they have something called retirement university. So she started studying French and going to choirs and doing all of this stuff, and I mean, she's not going to become a professional singer at 70 years old, but it's great fun, and it helps you grow, and it's never ending. That's great.
Absolutely. And I guess just one other thing that just kind of came to mind is one of the things whenever we have a change in our lives. So if you're moving and you move into a new living space, that's a perfect time to develop new habits. It's a really good opportunity. But also, if there's any kind of change to the rhythm of your life, so obviously with COVID, that changed a lot of people's lifestyles, and for me, that also affected things like not having regular sports activity affected my physical fitness. But another thing that I realized had some effect is, I've been fostering dogs since November, and so whenever I have a dog, the first thing I do in the morning is we go for a walk. So I'm not doing yoga or going for a run. I'm going for a walk, which is also good, but that hasn't gotten me to the fitness level that I want to. I'd go for walks for anywhere from 5 to 10K a day with these dogs, depending on what they were up for, and so yeah, it's interesting to look at slight kind of changes in your lifestyle, how they can affect your habits. So
Yeah,
so
totally.
now, yeah. So my most recent foster dog just got picked up last night, so that's a good
Oh,
reason for me to. Today, I did some fitness this morning, and very determined to get back into my routine.
yeah, great. Yeah, actually, I promised my wife to go to a fitness class with her starting very soon. So I need to, I need to run actually. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Uh,
Cool. Look, Toby, thanks for joining me. I hope this has been helpful for everyone listening. If you have any questions about habit change, feel free to reach out to either of us. You can reach Toby at his LinkedIn site, Tobias Demker, and then with me at my website, petertorshire.com. Send me a message if anyone has any topics they'd like us to cover, or any comments or feedback, positive or negative. We'd love to hear about it. So, Toby, thanks for joining me for another conversation. It's been fun.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah.
This is one, it's one I'm passionate about, so I could have talked about it for hours. But I hope we covered the main things, and I hope this has been helpful for all of our listeners. And hope to have you join us again soon. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks,
Yeah.
Toby.
Thanks.
Talk to you soon.
Bye.